Hello, good morning, good afternoon, perhaps good evening. Let's cover Beat Detective in Pro Tools. In other words, how to quantize audio. There are many different things that Beat Detective does, but we're going to focus in on how to quantize drums tightly to a grid. With that in mind, and without further ado, let's jump in. To demonstrate quantizing with Beat Detective, let's go take a look at this demo of Sitting on the Dock of the Bay by Otis Redding. So here you see a session that has a couple of drum loops at the top, drums in stylish purple right below, and then a MIDI bass and a MIDI piano track in yellow and green respectively, and then a scratch vocal. Let's listen to it top to bottom, and I am going to turn on the click so you can listen how the bass and the piano are right there with the tempo and grid of the session. And when the drums come in, listen to how the rhythm sounds okay, but it's ebbing and flowing just a little bit, and this creates an emotional byproduct, one that to my ear does not feel really secure and groovy, for lack of a better word. When we're halfway through the verse and halfway through the chorus, I will unmute these drum machines that we have playing loops basically over the sections. And I'd like for you to listen to how the drums felt by themselves and how they feel once the loops are in place. And without further ado, here we go.
Watching the ships roll in, and I watch them roll away again. I wanna sit on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away. I wanna sit on the dock of the bay.
And there we have it. As you could hear, when the drums are by themselves, they sound okay and they feel okay. When we put in the loops, we can clearly hear that there's an issue with the flamming of the kicks and the snares. And this is, of course, a technical issue that we need to fix. But more so, even without the loops, I feel that the drums could just feel more groovy. Again, for lack of a better word. So let's now take a look at how we're going to approach this. The first thing we need to do is make sure that when we're editing drums, we do so as a group. So here you see that all of my drum tracks are highlighted, and there is a drum group that I've created where I can mute everything at once, solo at once, and select them. This is very important because if we start moving only the snare or only the kick, we're going to create very grave phasing issues between the tracks. So we always must make sure to edit across all of the drum tracks. We're going to do this by creating duplicate playlists. And we will create one playlist that has all of our Beat Detective. Let's actually start with doing a duplicate playlist that will be a comp. So we'll choose the greatest hits of all the sections and we'll make a comp. Then we're going to make a Beat Detective playlist in where we're going to have a million little chops. And then ultimately we're going to have a clean Beat Detective but consolidated playlist so that our CPU is not bogged down with having to play a million little chops. So let's create our first duplicate playlist, and as usual, we'll see here this labeling, which right now is kick-bay for the name of the song, period 01, which is mirrored on every single track for consistency, which is important. Now that we have proper labeling and we create a duplicate playlist, Pro Tools is going to try and help by adding a 02. The thing is that this 02 is not really descriptive of what we're going to do, which is actually a comp, right? So let's go and write comp, and I'm just going to copy and then paste that name right at the end of each file so that, again, we have consistency and our labeling, makes total sense at the end of the day. So if we look back, everything in our drums is called .comp. Perfect. So now let's make a quick comp. The thing that I noticed here, if we zoom in, is that these first there's some hits, especially in this first bar, where some of the snares are a little bit quiet and sound thin, and then they sound nice and fat and solid later on. So let's listen and see where they sound kind of thin and where they sound nice and full.
Watching the ships roll in, and I watch them roll away again. I wanna.
So the thing that I'm noticing right away on this verse is that this bar, which I'm going to just make a cut right here, sounded pretty good. This bar also sounded pretty good, but the first and third had some snare hits that sounded kind of thin. So again, let me just play you the first one and the second one. Kind of thin.
I'll be sitting till the evening comes.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this bar, and since the pattern is just the same, I'm going to copy this, and since I am in grid mode set to bar, I'm just going to set my cursor right at the edge of the bar and paste. So now that's nice and full. And again, I can grab this fourth one or this second one. Actually, I'm going to grab the second one and copy. Pardon me. I'm going to grab the fourth and copy and paste it right there. So now we should have a performance that top to bottom has really uniform snares.
Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting till the evening comes, watching the ships roll in, and I watch them roll away again. I wanna sit on the dock of the bay.
So this sounds a lot better, except now we have some pops and some clicks due to the editing, which we're going to fix in a minute. I'm actually going to let go of the chorus because the chorus was actually played really consistently. So if I zoom in here, we see that right there, there's a little bit of a chopped and munched transient on the first kick. So I'm just going to move over the region as to not have that super obvious pop right there. And now we're ready to proceed. So now we have a comp, right? And I'm not doing any crossfades because Beat Detective wants to work without having crossfades. So now that this is ready, I am going to proceed to doing a little bit of Beat Detective. So I'm going to make a duplicate playlist. And again, Pro Tools is trying to be helpful by adding a .01, but I am going to add BD, which of course stands for Beat Detective, and I'm going to do that across all the tracks. Again, this labeling is really important because we want other engineers to be able to see our work and have it make sense without us being there to explain it. So now we have a track that is comped and ready for Beat Detective. What we should do now is proceed always on grid mode and with the resolution set to a bar, we should then select the portion we are about to quantize. So the thing I like to do is always select one bar before the drums come in and one bar after the chunk, the section that I want to do. Why? What's behind this? It's because sometimes we have songs that are really, really long and we need to break them up in pieces. Sometimes we have songs that have maybe a really, really complex drum fill that's in triplets or quintuplets, and we might need to just pause and do that section by hand, and eventually we need to do this in sections. So ultimately, we're going to have, as I said, one last duplicate playlist, which is going to have all of our work super tightly quantized in one uniform consolidated audio file. So I am going to do only the verse. Again, I am selecting from one bar before to one bar after. And then eventually I'm going to do from one bar before to one bar after. This is also obviously going to give us a 2-bar overlap, right, of the work that we're going to do. And this is also going to be really important because eventually we will need to crossfade between the two consolidated portions that we've made. I know it's a lot of information, but keep that in mind, and here we go. So let's do the first chunk with Beat Detective. We select one bar before, one bar after, and under event, let's open up Beat Detective. A quick rundown on how Beat Detective is organized and how it wants to work. Here on the left, we have a window that basically is showing us the steps to follow. In the center, we have another window, which is, think of it as the course settings of what we're going to do. And on the right, we have the fine-tuned settings of each one of the steps. Beat Detective, as I was mentioning in the intro, can do a couple of things. It can actually analyze the groove of the drums and try to create a beat map. And that is a function that we're not going to do now. All that we're going to do is do a bar beat marker generation, and the detection is not going to be collection, but rather normal, right? We're going to analyze what the hits, where the transients are, and it's going to cut and shift them to match the grid. Now, the first step is bar beat marker generation, and we go to the second window, and what we're going to do is click this capture selection. Once we do, you see that these numbers, bar 4 and bar 14, should match our selection here. This is really important. Sometimes it makes a mistake. If it does, make sure to fix anything because this is going to be crucial for Beat Detective to work properly. If we go down to the next item, time signature for 4, which is accurate, and then we have contains what? This groove actually does not contain 16th notes. It contains 8th notes. It's important for us to set this properly because if we leave it at 16ths, Beat Detective is going to look for them. And then it's probably going to get a little bit confused. So now that this is ready, we go to the next window and we know that the detection is normal. Analysis, here we have enhanced resolution, or is it low, or is it high emphasis? We're going to keep enhanced resolution. This basically is just, think of it as an audio filter through which Beat Detective listens to the audio that is in your tracks. So perhaps if you're doing a bass recording, or if you're doing, let's say, a flute, or if you're doing something that has pick sounds in a guitar, you might change this for enhanced detection. So let's keep enhanced resolution and let's click analyze. You see that it took a second and it analyzed the audio, and then this bar called sensitivity just came on. If we slide this, you will see that these purple arrows start to populate the track. What we need to do is increase this until all the hits that we want are highlighted. And I recommend not going any further. If you continue, Beat Detective, you're asking it to basically grab anything that it sees and cut and move. And you're basically asking Beat Detective to do more than it needs to. And confusion and glitches might ensue. So we're going to keep it at 20%. Resolution, is it bars? Is it beats? No, obviously it's subbeats. Now, with all of this, we are ready to move on to the next step. The next step here in this window says Groove Template Extraction. We're going to bypass that one because we're not extracting, right? We're not doing collection. We're doing normal, so we're going to move on to this third one called Clip Separation. If I do that again, see how this trigger pad just came on. And now we could hit separate, but we need to basically give this a trigger pad. What does this mean? If we zoom in on the detection, you see that it has put a detection line right at the edge of the transient. What happens if we cut right here and then eventually create a crossfade is that the crossfade is going to change the amplitude of the hit. And we don't want that. We want each hit to be super tight and punchy. So in order not to mess with the amplitude, we need to give this a little buffer of time or a trigger pad. We're going to use 12 milliseconds. And this number is something that I learned when I was working under the Metallica camp of drum editing. And it's a number that is stuck in my head, and it really, really, really works. So 12 milliseconds is good enough for Metallica, good enough for me. I recommend it to you all. Now I'm going to go and push separate. Now you see that it has created a cut right at each one of these hits. If I zoom all the way out and see that every one of these hits has been cut as it advertises, the next thing to do is move on to the next step called Clip Conform. Here you see that this window changed drastically, and it's going to ask me, do you want it on standard or you want this to groove? Even though groove sounds like a good thing, I will recommend for you to keep it in standard, because this is basically telling Beat Detective to move things right to the grid, instead of asking Beat Detective to, sure, we're going to do it in groove and I want you to put a feel injector. Well, I don't really know what feel injector sounds like, but at least I'd like to know what the specific sound of the drums that I'm quantizing. And I have to say that putting things tightly to the grid, at least to my ears, makes things feel really, really, really solid and robust. And all of that quote unquote human feel that sometimes we fear losing is just embedded in the sound of the actual acoustic drums. So with that in mind, I'm going to keep things at standard, and I'm not going to check in strength, exclude within, or swing, and I'm just going to go ahead and click conform. So you see now that it shifted the tracks, and you can also see that there are some gaps, and you see that there might be some little flammy issues here. No worries. Now that we have conformed these drums to the grid, let's listen. We anticipate that we're going to hear all these glitches, but that's not really what we're looking for. We're just looking for Beat Detective having moved the performance to the correct place and not, say, have it shifted by a 16th note or something like this. So with that in mind, let's listen.
Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting till the evening comes, watching the ships roll in, and I watch them roll away again. I wanna seat on the dock.
And it sounds great. So now that that test is successful, let's move on to edit smoothing. We click this and you see now that this window changes to, do you want to fill gaps or do you want to fill gaps in crossfade? Of course, we're going to want to fill gaps in crossfade. So let's go ahead and click that. What's the length? I'm going to say 6 milliseconds because it's half of the trigger pad 12. Now that we've selected that, I'm going to click smooth. And you see how, as advertised, it filled in the gaps and it created a 6 millisecond crossfade. Now we need to check that it sounds perfect. We know the timing is good, but now we need to make sure that the edits sound clean. Already we see that there's this little flam glitch in the beginning, but fear not. Let's listen and then we'll fix whatever needs to be fixed manually. Here we go. Great. So it did everything perfect except we heard that little glitch on bar 5 and that little glitch on bar 9. I'm always expecting something to be a little bit off, so I'm always totally cool with just zooming in and fixing things by hand as you see me do here. So let's go to bar 9, zoom in and fix that. Now we know that this is perfect. So we are ready to move on to the consolidating of this quantized performance portion of the program. So let's go to our playlists and create one final duplicate playlist, right? It's going to be helpful or try to be helpful and add .01, but we need to do this manually and add consolidate. So this is getting a little bit lengthy, but I want to just underline for you that the bar here is anyone in the world should be able to see your work and make sense of what it is. Kick, Dock of the Bay, what version, dot, comped, beat detective, and consolidated. So across the board, I am going to paste and make the whole group uniform in its labeling. So now that that's there, I am going to consolidate these clips. Under Edit, Consolidate Clip, or that's the quick key, and here we go. Look at that. And now you see that even the labeling is perfect. Awesome. So now that that's there, let's go and quickly do this remaining part. So now we get to backtrack. We're going to go to the beat detective. And as I mentioned before, we need to do one bar, before, right? And 1 bar after. So you see that this bar already has some editing done. If I go to my previous playlists, which are there for this very reason, right? So we can backtrack in case we make a mistake. This is the comp. So what I'm going to do is take this, which is what we're going to want to edit from my original comp, and I'm going to copy, and I'm going to paste that onto my beat detective playlist. And now that that's ready, and I have ensured that I have this little overlap here, I am now going to start again and chop these drums on that second half. So I'm going to go a little bit faster now. And step 1, capture selection, 12, 22, 12, 22, eighth notes, enhance resolution. I'm going to analyze. We see here that the sensitivity should pretty much be the same, and I'm going to leave it there at 20. Perfect, and move on to the next step, which is clip separation. Trigger pad still at 12. Separate. Clip conform. And now let's listen.
I wanna sit on the dock of the bay, watching the tide.
It's okay that we hear these little glitches. We're just listening for timing, right?
Sit on the dock of the bay, wasting time.
That sounded perfect. So now let's go to the last step. Fill in crossfade, 6 milliseconds. We're going to smooth this out and listen in solo to make sure we have no glitches. It sounds accurate, except I think I heard a little glitch right around here. Let's check it out. It seems okay. So this is really important, right? We need to make sure our work is just top notch and perfect all the time. So now that that is accurate, we can now copy this and paste it to our consolidated playlist. So we can keep all these chops in one playlist, move on to our consolidated one, and we're going to paste that over. Now we can proceed to consolidating the clips. And we now need to just create a little crossfade between these two. So you see that we're able to create a crossfade because we have overlapping audio files, right? I'm going to go right before this initial hit of the kick and do a very tight crossfade there. And let's see how this sounds. Perfect. We're done. We're done with Beat Detective. So now, just to make sure that all of this juggle is worth the effort, let's go listen to this track with the loops on and see how we're doing as far as not even the technical side of the endeavor, but rather how does it feel? Does it sound like it grooves? Does it sound like it has pocket? Does it convey a great pulse for the singer and the piano and the bass to really do their groovy thing on top of? Let's check it out.
Ships rolling, and I watch them roll away again. I wanna sit on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away. I wanna sit on the dock of the bay, wasting time.
This is sounding and feeling great to me. And now that we have everything tightly quantized to the grid, we can then get really creative and do things like maybe drop in the loop halfway through to have it be an added surprise. Like, for example,
I'll be sitting till the evening comes, watching the ships rolling, and I watch them roll away again.
Yeah, and this is a far cry from where we started. I hope this has been useful to you, and that now, knowing all the technical side of Beat Detective, you can really use it as a super powerful tool to emotionally bolster the impact of all of your productions and make them as groovy as possible.